On today's episode, we are interviewing Joanna Track. Now, if you want to learn about marketing, as well as newsletters and email campaigns, this is definitely the episode for you. She chats about how you can actually scale your business to the next level with emails and really help automate them into systems. So let's jump into this episode and learn more about Joanna Track. Well, let's get started in the sense of your story, like kind of where the entrepreneurial journey started for you and kind of starting the path of what you thought you were going to get into when it came to careers and all of it.
Sure. Well, I mean, I had a pretty interesting, unexpected path because I actually started on my career journey thinking I was going into something finance related. I always had a strong aptitude for math and analytical stuff. So, like, all through high school, I veered towards those courses, and then I majored in math in university with a specialty in calculus. And yeah, and then I actually went straight into MBA and majored in finance. And it was between first and second year MBA where I had an internship at Merrill Lynch, and I was actually working on the bond trading floor. So, like, the most high pace finance, Bay Street in Toronto, like, you couldn't get more finance than that. And I worked there for 4 months. And at the end of the summer, I had like a total aha moment. And I feel really blessed because a lot of people, this takes like 10, 20 years into their career. And I was basically pre-career, where I had this moment where I was like, okay, I'm really good at this and it comes naturally and the pay is great and all those things, but I just don't like it. Like, it doesn't interest me. It doesn't excite me. I don't like the culture, like, and no slight against it. Some people like really thrive. They love the, wearing the suits and the power lunches and like all the stuff that goes on with Bay Street. And for me, it was like a fish out of water. I just felt like I didn't belong. I always joke that like I couldn't concentrate and wear pantyhose. Like I just like, it was like, how can you dress like this and think? Like, they just didn't jive for me. And the subject matter, like, you're talking about money all day. And again, for some people, that's really interesting and exciting. And for me, I was like, I need something more tangible, more colorful, per se. And I went back to second year MBA and I dropped all my finance courses, much to my parents' chagrin. And I just took a like jumble of things. I took marketing and HR and economics, and just like, I didn't know what I wanted to do. So I just said, hey, but what I did notice was, like, part of MBA, you're supposed to read the business section of the newspaper. And I found myself always flipping, and it was on the back page, go figure, was the marketing columns. And I was always so interested and so fascinated. And even in high school, I worked at Roots for like 4 years. And I was just so fascinated how these two people had an idea and they turned it into this thing that people were in love with. I just was really drawn to that. So I got out of MBA and was pounding the pavement. It was happened to be a recession. And I eventually found a job as a marketing coordinator at a small fashion company. They imported women's aerobic wear into Canada from California. And I started like at literally a quarter of the salary I would have gotten if I'd started in finance. And I worked my way up. I went from there. I worked at Air Miles in the marketing group for a couple of years. And then I eventually found myself to Ogilvy and Mather, large ad agency. And I always say that's where I got my my PhD in branding and marketing. And I really felt like I thrived. I learned so much. I loved it. Like, I loved everything about it. The only thing that I had trouble with was it not being my own.
Yeah.
And I always felt like that entrepreneurial itch, like, I wanted to feel like I had more skin in the game. And actually, through Ogilvy, I had the opportunity to live in New York for about a year and a half. And while I was living in New York, I got introduced to a business that was still relatively new at the time. It was called Daily Candy. It's not around anymore, but it was hugely popular in the early 2000s. And it was a daily newsletter of like what was hot and happening in New York and LA and all the big cities in the US. And I was like, this is the coolest thing ever. And I mean, for me as a newbie to the city, it was like a real navigator for me. And so then when my time was up in New York and I came back to Toronto, I was still working at Ogilvy, but I had this like beginning of an idea in my head. I knew nothing about like email, technology, publishing, anything, but I knew marketing, and I knew how to work hard. And I say I jumped off a cliff and I I took the plunge, and that's how the idea for Sweet Spot, my first business, was born, and launched it in early 2004. And it was interesting because at the time, email was something that was really limited to like B2B communications. It was like, oh, Grandin Toy would let you know you ran out of paper. Banks would tell you like, your statement is ready, but you couldn't even get your statement online. Like, it was really not a sexy, consumer friendly product email. So people were like just all over it. Like, they thought it was so cool. It was new. So I got to ride on the newness of it, and grew the business and eventually sold it to Rogers. And I mean, that was how I got my feet wet in the entrepreneurial world. And then since then, it sort of followed this path of digital publishing, content, storytelling. I've done it in a few different forms, but it always comes back to that same idea of taking content, making it engaging, but also with a business purpose. So, and that's kind of what I'm still doing today, almost 20 years later.
That's amazing. And that story too, like the entrepreneurship, you can be any age, any part of your journey of your life and jump on the entrepreneur train.
Absolutely. Like for me, I mean, when I launched Sweet Spot, I was 32, which is young, but for a lot of entrepreneurs, that seems old. I always loved that movie, The Founder, about the guy from McDonald's. I mean, there is no real age, and it's the energy and the passion and the business thinking. And I think, being an entrepreneur doesn't have an age limit.
Yeah, I actually love that movie. That's probably one of my top favorite movies, because the excitement and the realness behind it. And you know what? You see a problem, you want to solve it, you see the potential to something, and that's what gets people excited, right? And it usually,
and also, like, we had failure before success. Like, people probably look at the Golden Arches and be like, oh wow, those people, um they're so lucky they were so successful. But most successful endeavors come from some failure, and also never overnight. Like,
100%, 100%.
never happens.
And that's kind of what this podcast is great for, is it's giving the real behind the scenes of what's going on with businesses. And we always say beauty behind the brand, because the beauty is the people we're talking to. It's kind of like that hockey term, right? Like, oh, that guy's such a beauty, or that woman, right? Like, that's the way I look at it, is like, we're the beautiful beings behind what we're building. And I think that's what entrepreneurship can mean so many different things to people. And those side hustles people are really getting, especially with COVID. I feel like all these passion projects people are starting on. But I find with the news, like what you were saying about the communications and telling the story, and was that something you were really, because you said you were more into like the math and like numbers and that kind of thing. So what kind of pivoted that notion into the actual literature of it?
Yeah, I mean, it's really funny because it took me probably almost 15 years to figure out what the thread was that brought them together. And then when I did, I was like, oh, yeah, my whole life is about the same theme, which is, I have this mind that naturally works really analytically, problem solving. That's why I liked math, because like there was only one answer. I hated gray area, which has been a good lesson for me in life, because there's a lot of gray area. So I've learned the hard way to get comfortable with it. But it was always like problem solution. How do you get there? And so even though I've gotten into the content business, which you would think is more gray area, and for me, that was why I hated English. I didn't hate it, but I found it very stressful, because it was like, you write an essay and it's up to the teacher to decide if it's right. Like, it was too subjective for me. But the thing that is similar in all the content I've done is we take things that are complex and we simplify, we filter, we make it easy, or we do the work for people. So like with Sweet Spot, we were finding all the latest trends and dishing it out to people in really short bits of information. So it wasn't like a complex thought, a new restaurant, but it's like there's a million new restaurants. So we would do the work of finding them, reviewing them, and telling you about them. And the bullet, as you know, the entire business model is about taking this wide, vast array of complex and depressing news and wrapping it up in a short, sweet, digestible digest that, people can easily read and consume. So I basically took my math skills and applied it to content. And I think from the feedback I've gotten over the years that people love, and that I know I love, is that it's the voice. So Sweet Spot, the bullet, and all the other stuff I do is we speak in a language that is simple and easy to understand and not boring. So it's like the medicine that helps, or it's like it makes the medicine go down.
Yeah, 100%. And I also feel like, to be honest, you look at technology and how quick people are reading content. People aren't going to want to read this massive long story, and you're really calculating it down to the important facts that we want to read anyways.
So it's like, in my high school years and university, I was a math tutor, and it's almost like I use the same skill set. Like I take stuff that is really confusing that people don't want to deal with, and I break it down into chunks that make it easier and sometimes more fun.
Yeah. In the back of my mind, I always knew I wanted to be a podcast host. I always wanted my own podcast, having meaningful conversations with individuals and really wanting to showcase that on a platform, but not knowing where to start. I feel like many of us are held back because we don't know where to start, but Buzzsprout was definitely the place for me to start. I did lots and lots of research about this brand, as well as how amazing their customer service was, the detailed YouTube videos they had to offer, as well as just simple. So simple. You don't need to be a tech whiz to run a podcast because Buzzsprout has made it simple for you. Now, Beauty Behind the Brand has made a link below where you can actually earn a $20 Amazon gift card after your second paid invoice has gone through once you sign up. Now, once again, Buzzsprout is definitely the place to be if you're signing up and wanting to create your own podcast. Good luck, everyone. So how long has the bullet been around now, just for our listeners to kind of get a...
Oh, so the bullet is just coming up on its 5-year anniversary, which is hard to believe. And yeah, so, and we're constantly evolving and changing and learning. So sometimes it still feels like the first day, and now it just feels like it's just a part of life.
Exactly. Yeah. Now with when you're selling, when you go to sell a business, this is always a question I have for entrepreneurs too, is when you go to sell a business, how hard is it to let that project go? Like I know a bit of the story from different conversations we've had and with podcasts I've listened to that you've been on. Was it hard working corporate as a female and like being in that, I don't even know, like just the whole realm of being that female entrepreneur in kind of a male dominant industry? Like, how did that feel when it went to selling your business and people taking you seriously? Can you talk a little bit more about that experience?
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting because, like, going back again to when I was working in the ad agency, it was a very female marketing and advertising tends to be sort of female skewed, except at the top, still a lot of men. That's changed now, but 20 years ago, it was pretty much the formula. And then when I started my own businesses, it wasn't that I was discriminating, but because of the nature of the business that we were talking about, lifestyle, fashion, beauty, of course, it attracted female employees. So I like with Sweet Spot, we were at our peak, we were about 30 employees, of which pretty much at any given time, 28 of them were female. Um, and when we sold it to Rogers, obviously, it was a different skew over there. And I do think there was a real disconnect understanding like the product and what made it tick and what made it special. And I mean, the fact that after 2 years, Rogers managed to drive it into the ground and non-existence, is that because it was run by men? I'm not going to say that at all.
Yeah.
But I think there was a less of an understanding of the audience and what its needs were and what made it special and unique for sure. And I've come across that a few times. I guess the second really challenging experience I had with sort of being a woman in a man's world was when I launched my next business, which was Elux, which was an e-commerce destination, but built within a content strategy. So we had like a digital magazine and we had a store. We were selling women's contemporary clothing and accessories. But to do that required a huge amount of capital and investment. And I was out there fundraising for the better part of 2 years. And of course, I went across Canada meeting with venture capitalists and wealthy individuals, and most of them were men. And the stats then were even more pathetic than they still are. But, it was like 1% of funds were going to women entrepreneurs. And like, I was literally laughed out of the room sometimes. People were like, oh, women aren't going to buy shoes online.
You were before your time.
I was in fundraising meetings where people asked me if I was having more kids, what was my plan, like who would ask that? to
Yeah.
a guy, and it was really disheartening. I ended up not raising a single dollar from an institution. I raised it all from individuals, but it still wasn't enough to scale the business. So sadly, it never happened. Ironically, if it were around or launching today,
Oh, yeah, you were just before your
I
time.
was ahead of my time. And, it was between being in Canada and a female and in the fashion industry, I had like all those strikes against me. And, people just weren't ready to see what is now very obvious.
Yeah, that's something I find with a lot of creative entrepreneurs and who really look at where things are going and the forecast of where they see like e-commerce are like that's I feel like that's a huge topic I've been touching on a lot lately in the past couple episodes is the online space as well as right now with COVID. I mean, we can't obviously go anywhere for the most part to go shopping. So the online space, but yeah, that was a huge thing that we talked about during the forum groups in Toronto too, when you were my den mother, right? We were talking about our elevator pitch, and I remember actually having to pitch my business in front of the group at FWA when it was called that at that time. And that's something that is scary, I think, for any, even though I was pitching in front of angel investors, but it's something that is not taught a lot or talked about a lot is that simple thing as an elevator pitch or how to pitch your business. How, I mean, we know our business for the most part inside and out, but how are you going to deliver those facts to someone who asks you what it is?
Absolutely. I mean, I call it in the marketing space, I sometimes call this the marketer's curse, where we're so ingrained in our world of what we do, whether it's, beauty or fashion or
Mm-hmm.
business or accounting, whatever it is. Like we know our world so well, and we start to talk and think in certain things that seem so natural to us that you can't believe that someone else doesn't understand what you're talking about.
It's like our language, right? Like my boyfriend's in finance, and he'll like I'm like, okay, you're speaking a different language. Like it's like me talking about eyelash extensions to you.
Yeah,
You're not gonna know what I'm talking about.
exactly. And it's just, we have to think from outside of, what someone who doesn't live immersed in that category understands or even cares about.
Exactly. So, for a lot of our listeners that are listening to this podcast, for the most part, are fairly new entrepreneurs or just kind of dipping their feet into the water when it comes to the entrepreneurial space. Now, for your marketing aspect of the knowledge you have, like this is why wanted to have you on too, is just because of like everything that I was like, we gotta get her on. We gotta get Joanna on.
Oh, yay.
So, when it comes to marketing and for entrepreneurs, what is something that you normally, I know from like having you as my den mother at FW, we had these conversations, but can you share more in detail with our listeners of some of the big things that they should be kind of dipping their toes into in the sense of kind of jump starting their business on the marketing aspect?
Hmm. Um, well, again, this probably comes from my math analytical background, but I always say, like, regardless of what you're doing, test and learn and optimize. Do not like go blow your brains out on one thing. Like, you might think it's really, sexy and exciting to get a big, huge billboard like in your city. I'm just giving an extreme example because you can see it and you think everyone else can see it, and therefore it's going to be successful. How are you going to know? I mean, maybe you'll know if you have a phone number, but like think about how you're going to measure results and
Yeah.
what you're going to learn from it, and start to dip your toe in. Start by spending like a little bit. And the great thing that I love about the digital world is you can make small investments and see your results. So whether that's AdWords or, boosting or, social media, um, and even email, you can see how many people open it, what they click on. Like you learn so much from all the digital patterns that is much harder to get in like general advertising, if we call it, whether that's print or TV or anything like that. Those things have a place, but especially for a startup, they are very expensive.
Yeah.
And I would say the ROI is, well, A, hard to measure, and B, like, I mean, it really supports the businesses who can already afford it. It just adds another layer onto what they're doing. If you're a small business getting started, you need to build a following. So whether that's one person telling another person telling another person, I mean, that is worth spending your money on. Or, sometimes you don't have to spend your money. You just have to have something really good that people want to share, and you have to encourage them to share it. So it's, testing a few things, seeing what works, doubling down on them, keeping track of the metrics, and, always at the end of the day, looking at the ROI. If I told you it's going to cost $10,000 to do a Google AdWords campaign, but it's going to generate $50,000 in revenue, you don't need to be a genius to know that it's worth spending $10,000. But you don't know that until, say, you spend the first 500 or 1,000, and start to learn what's working.
For those who have been listening, I'm a massive fan of Squarespace, and I don't really know what I would do without them. With both our brick and mortar store as well as our e-commerce, I can do everything in one place. Whether it's e-commerce, I can do inventory, email campaigns, appointments, and so much more. Now, Beauty Behind the Brand has partnered up with Squarespace to offer you 10% off your first subscription. All you need is promo code PARTNER10. Exactly. And you can track it all. That's what I love about the technology of marketing, is because you can actually track it. Like you said, how many people open that email, what people are catching people's eyes. I learned that the hard way, actually. That when you brought that up, it made me think. When I first opened our spa, I was like, I'm going to get this ad came up for this wedding magazine, Muskoka Wedding magazine. And I was like, yeah, I'll pay whatever. It was like $600 or something to have this picture. Anyways, the picture, I don't even know what happened to the quality. It got printed. I never even saw the magazine, never even got one wedding from it. And I do one wedding party as well as take photos and advertise it on social media. And I end up being booked pretty much for the whole year. So I was like, oh my gosh, like I learned that the hard way.
Right. But most entrepreneurs do. That's how you learn your best lessons. But yeah, I think it's really, really important to sort of dip your toe in a few things before. And then also, though, be mindful of all the factors. Like I learned this in my early days of advertising, like, there's the timing, there's the offer, and the offer doesn't mean like a discount, but is like, what are you, either asked people are giving them, the audience. Like you could have the best ad in front of the wrong group of people and it's not going to do anything. And then the creative, like if it's just, and creative again can mean a lot of things. If it's audio, if it's visual, if whatever it is, those 4 factors have to be aligned. So you could have 3 of them right, but like I said, be in the wrong audience, or like, be promoting like Christmas gifts in July. Like timing is everything. So you got to make sure that those 4 things are, aligned in order to get it right, I think, in marketing.
Yeah. Like we now with our product line, for example, sometimes I'm like, oh my gosh, I forgot we were even like in May pretty much now, or what, like,
I know, who knows?
It's like, what month are we even in right now? I feel like everything's jumbled around. But it was funny because I was saying it's crazy with the holidays, how things are coming up and how far in advance companies are having to figure out those sales and the marketing tactics and how to have that clear message with your customers and consumers. Because I notice that a lot with a lot of marketing stuff is people, it's like you're jumping on, you're like, hey, what is exactly you're selling and why? Or you're seeing these Instagram pages, for example, and you're like, okay, you've got a beautiful feed, but what are you selling? Like in the bio, at least make that clear of what your mission statement is with your business and where you're even located. That's another thing I find is like, I'm a huge Canadian, like I want to support Canadian businesses as much as possible. Put that in your bio, like right away. Like I want to know where you are, at least put a Canadian flag so I know what country I'm buying from. So yeah,
I totally agree with you. Like clear, simple, straight to the point. You can't go wrong.
Yeah, like that elevator pitch.
Yeah, exactly. Right. That's where the best. Yeah, when you don't have the time, like the whole thing about the elevator pitch is you don't have a lot of time, and that's the same for the real world. Like any day, but especially now when people really have ADD, like you don't have a lot of time to get someone's attention and interest. So use it wisely.
Exactly. So with the bulletin, what is some of the biggest things? Did you have to like pivot quite a bit during COVID and like everything changing in the world, or did it like benefit you in a way almost because you are all marketing and online?
I mean, yes and no. So like I'll start with the positive. The positive was that yes, while we were going through a global crisis, a lot of people were very interested in reading the news. And what people were telling us time and time again was that the bullet was such a critical source for them because they were so freaked out by like the mainstream news and the dramatization that we were just giving them the straight goods and still giving them some lightness. And so a lot of people told us like they were turning off the news, only reading us. I mean, that was really rewarding. And so our open rates went up, our engagement, like we saw a huge lift. However, we make our money through advertisers and clients, and they all basically hightailed it. A lot of them are retailers, lifestyle goods and stuff like that. And so there was a time where we were pretty much doing it like out of the goodness of our hearts because we were barely getting paid and we just wanted to contribute. We kind of looked at ourselves as essential workers in the sense like, you know, we were giving this service to people. But, you know, without the government funding, we would have probably been done for because there was a period of time where people just were not moving their marketing budgets. I think what happened after about, well, I guess 6 months, like come September of last year, a lot of brands realized, hey, wait a minute, I need to be in the digital space. So if they weren't already, they were getting in. And if they were starting to ramp up and pay more attention to it. And so then things started to get better for us.
Mm-hmm. That's a huge, the government grants too. Like we were honored to be able to accept those too for our business. Cause same thing, like for example, we were down 95% in revenue for our spa, and like I still got rent to pay. Like they really amped it up with the subsidies and wage subsidies, but for some of those businesses that didn't have payroll or they didn't have like an experience of being open for over a year or whatever the credentials were, my heart went out to them and still does, because those government grants were a huge help in so many different ways. And just knowing like you had that extra cushion just in case this was going to go on longer. And personally, I think it's gone on longer than I expected it to. Like,
yeah, me too.
Oh my gosh, it seems like a never ending horror film. Like I'm just like,
I used to be way more optimistic, maybe to my own, you know, error. I'd be like, oh, by September it'll be fine, but this will be fine. Now I'm like, oh, I have no idea. I don't know.
I know. Yeah, and being in control. I was having this conversation with a good friend, like being in control of what we can be in control of. Like obviously there's a pandemic going on, but what can we do to stay in control of ourselves? Like I can control what I'm eating, I control my exercise, I can control all these things that are going to help me, but it's also like really amping it up into that business side of things too. Like what can I can control my online store, I can control what I'm putting out there on social media. And that's why the marketing aspect, I feel like it was no better time than now to get you on here, because I think that's what people are having to do. Like what I was saying about the newsletters, of having that communication with people, and we're all connected, right? It's just how to have that conversation with people virtually, right?
Yeah, and I feel like even before COVID, emails and newsletters were having a renaissance because people were realizing, like, I kind of call it the Goldilocks, because, you know, people veered towards digital because mainstream media, you know, was too long, was too this, was too that, like newspapers, TV, whatever. Social media came along and it's all the way to the other side. It's so short, boom, 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 boom. And email's right in the middle. Like it gives you just the right amount of content. You can click if you want more. And it's very personalized. It's the only thing that you receive, literally, that you opt in and have full control over. Like your social media feed has stuff you don't control, TV, all those things. Whereas you control what comes in your inbox, and as granular and niche as you want to get, there's something out there for you. So like if you have some, you know, random hobby or interest, you can probably find content that will come into your inbox that is just specifically to that. And, you know, I saw it as a lost opportunity for a lot of brands because they have massive email database. That is a massive asset. People have basically said, yes, you can call. That's like saying, yes, you can ring on my doorbell, like come see me, which I hate, right? And so people have said, yes, you can contact me. And then a lot of brands do one of two things. They either take way too much advantage and send you a bunch of garbage, or B, they don't do anything. And I saw especially people in COVID were like, oh, well, our store's not open, so we're not going to contact people. Well, okay, maybe don't email them every day, but like, why don't you give them some value? Like, why don't you give something and stay top of mind and in their hearts? Like, do something. Like the cost of an email is, you know, relative to other things, inexpensive.
Yeah.
And if done right, like I heard someone the other day say, there's never too much email if it's interesting.
Oh, I like that. As a busy entrepreneur, I know how important nutrition is for my brain health. I know how I need to be on all the time, as well as my energy levels. Now, a lot of my energy also comes from my healthy gut, which is my nutrition and food. Now, Goodfood, if you haven't heard of it, it's definitely a good idea. If you put in promo code Nicole 3x2, you will get 40% off or more on your first order. Now, I'm just warning you, it's a little addicting. I definitely get it every single week, and it has changed the way I am in the kitchen, as well as my productivity and time management. No more going to the grocery store. I barely have to go. The only time I have to go is for the essentials like coffee creamer, coffee, or any of those type of little miscellaneous things I might need around the kitchen. But once again, we will put the show notes below for you to get your promo code through Nicole 3x2. Happy shopping, everyone. Yeah. Because I also, like, I looked at speaking of databases, like we had just switched. So we were using MailChimp, and then we actually switched over to Squarespace because they offer a mailing campaign now, and we have all of our platforms through there. So we had thousands upon thousands of emails. I'm like, why am I not utilizing these? So that was why we started jumping on board and really starting to do education through those, as well as our sales and keeping people on top of what's going on. Because like you said, you technically own those. Like Facebook owns your followers there. Instagram, they can close or open that. Like if these databases went down, how are you going to contact everybody? Through email. So yeah, it's definitely something I feel like it's kind of like it's it's something that's always going to be around. It's always, people are always going to be using it. And also for age demographic. I have a lot of older clients that don't even have a cell phone, but they have an email. Like they'll use their computer or whatever to open up their emails, but they're not on Instagram, they're not on Facebook, but they always respond back to our newsletters. Like they just love getting our newsletters. And I'm like, well, we need to do this more often. So that's something that I think more people need to take advantage, like you mentioned.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I mean, I think it is more sort of ageless and timeless, because it's somewhere between reading a book.
Yeah.
Like it's everyone knows how to read, and it is sort of, it's more private and it feels more one-on-one, even if it's not totally personalized to you.
Yeah. And it's
Not
more
in the stream.
Yeah, it's more intimate that way. And two, now there's so many ways, like after someone's bought a product, you can send them an email, please send us a review or whatever. And even like, thank you for coming by, or, oh, you left something in your cart. Like there's so many things that are automated through email now that people aren't taking advantage of, but the systems are there to make it happen.
Yeah. And like you take the work, you do the work to set that stuff up once, and then it's done. Like you don't have to keep reinventing it all the time.
Yeah, and not even having to reinvent the wheel, like you said, right? It's already there. We take advantage of it. That's why with the spa, like with everything being closed, I'm so busy. Like I'm just like going online and trying to utilize, and I'm not very techy, so going on and like making these systems all happen and doing research, because then when we are open, all those systems are already in place, right? And like they're just going to happen automatically, and it's all going to generate on its own. It's just going to be saving you time and money at the end of the day.
Yeah, exactly. Like you do the work up front and then it pays off over and over again.
Yeah, exactly. What are some of the things that you would tell our listeners too when it comes to actually curating a newsletter? What are some of the like main suggestions you would have for them?
So there's a philosophy or principle that we use in our team that we always stick to. We call it the 3 E's, and it doesn't only go for newsletters, it goes for any type of content, and that is to enlighten, entertain, and or educate. So every piece of content should do at least one of those 3 things. And we also talk a lot more, it's about the long game. A lot of like promotional emails are looking for the quick hit, instant gratification, like buy this thing, download this, do this, an action. Whereas when you're providing content for people, you're giving something. You're not necessarily asking in the short term. You're giving them something in the hopes and goal that they're going to like fall more and more in love with your brand and be more interested and more trusting of what you have to say. So, if you're not achieving one of those 3 E's in a piece of content, then like you have to wonder why you're doing it. I mean, again, like a promotion is something else. You know exactly why you're doing it. But for someone to want to receive a newsletter from you on a regular basis, there has to be more to it than just a promotion.
Yeah. So you want
then
to,
it's all take and no give, right?
yeah.
And so I think that's important. Some of the best practices that I've kind of adopted over the years is just to keep it really clean and simple and easy to read. It's not to say you always have to be on a white background, but like just make sure that it is easy to read. And in this day and age, if it is not mobile first, then you completely missed an opportunity. I can't believe still today, I open up emails that on my phone are like microscopic.
Yes.
People have not built them for mobile. Like they built them for their desktop and then it's just shrunk. And I'm like, what are you doing? Like you should know better by now.
And those are big companies. I just opened one
Yeah.
up. I can't remember I don't want to mention what company it was, but it was like a pretty big box store I had bought something from. And I was like, I can't even read. I literally had to go to my laptop to read what the heck this email was. Like, I mean, I could zoom it in, but then I was trying to hold it and read it. So that's a huge point. That's a really good thing to touch on. I like that.
Yeah. And then going back to that sort of Goldilocks, like I think we all now operate in like some things we can handle longer form, but give people like a bit of a mix and match. Like some things are like right there, whether it's just like a quote or a pick of the week or whatever it is. It's like so short and sweet and like a quick bite. And then there can be longer bites. You can give a bit more, but I would never give too much in an email. Give people like the links to click into the right place. So it's like a menu. You can, give people options and sort of think about your hierarchy and importance of information the way you would do, any sort of presentation or, even when people write a book, it follows a pattern. And make sure you adopt that into your newsletters.
You're kind of like casting that hook for them to get the hook and then to bring them in.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, because that's something.
I always think like, why would someone care? That's what we always like. Our team is like, why should they care?
Yes.
Like we always like laugh like when we see big companies announcing like this person got promoted, this person. Okay, like maybe it's good to know for a minute, but like how much do I need to know? Like who else cares besides like that company?
Yeah, that's a really good example. Yeah, because that's something like, so regarding the 3 E's, ideally you should be touching all three of those in any type of marketing.
Well, not necessarily all three at the same time, but at least one at any given moment. So, like education, teaching someone how to do something, or like what an ingredient is for and what its purpose is, doesn't have to be so much, say, entertaining. And entertaining also doesn't mean only making people laugh. Entertainment, although people usually think that, and there is a lot to be said. Like I once read an article that still sticks with me today, and it was titled "Content is King as long as it's funny." I mean, people do, like, the world is depressing enough as it is. If you can, make it light. Obviously, if you're talking about a really serious subject, you have to know your time and place. But where you can, it's great. But entertainment can also be like pulling on someone's heartstrings or, making them just think more about something. It doesn't have to be funny, but it has to elicit an emotion. And enlightenment is like letting them in on something they didn't know, a secret, an inside scoop, like, something that is, takes them to a new level. It's kind of like education, but education to me is more like how to.
Yeah. I feel like the enlightenment, it's kind of like you're kind of having that intimate moment with them where it's like, oh, I'm going to tell you a secret, or this is what's coming. You better be ready for it, or something, right? Giving them inside scoop. Exactly. Yeah. Well, even marketing, like we have a team member who's been doing a lot of the podcast editing, and she does a lot of our marketing. And oh my God, the TikTok, I don't know if you, I don't know if your son has TikTok, but oh my gosh, some of the dancing, like I'm fine with dancing and camera and entertainment that way, but it's so funny I'm thinking now of those 3 E's, thinking what one of those 3 E's actually goes higher in our algorithm in the sense of like analytics and all that stuff. But I'm just like laughing because I'm like, a lot of my dancing videos, I think, are the entertainment side.
Well, there's a lot to be said. It serves a purpose, that's for sure.
Well, and the enlightenment, like they're a part of people just wanting some positivity. And that's what I've been really trying to ask people, what they want to see more of and why, to really reach out, because we have all of our followers in our hands, right? We can ask them, what do you want to see more of, or what's engaging to you? And I think people need to see what the audience wants, not so much us as like the creator. Like we
Totally.
think
Well, it
we
goes back to the why should they care? And like, yeah, I mean, listening is, is the best gift you can give to someone.
yeah, absolutely. What are some of the big struggles that you've noticed, like with working virtual, like with your team and things like that? Has that been a hard change because of
I
COVID? Or
just, in theory, we can do our job exactly the same from wherever we are.
yeah,
But we also love each other. We love the energy. Like we love spending time together. So that's been hard. It's like felt really lonely. It took me quite a while. Like I used to really struggle working at home. I couldn't focus. Working from home meant like cleaning the house, doing the laundry, like and now I've learned how to sort of have boundaries, and yes and no. I feel sometimes it's very challenging, like to end from day to night, like from work to not work. But over time it's getting better and better. But I don't think there is any replacement like for that in-person engagement. Like I was just talking to my team the other day, like stuff that would normally like you could just pop your head into someone's office or at their desk and ask them a question now involves like setting up a call and like everything like just takes, even though there's no commute times and stuff like that, I just feel like things take longer
yeah.
because you can't have that. And like some of the best ideas just come from like sitting around and bantering. So I
Mhm.
think we're operating and we're doing a really good job, but I look forward to the day when we can all be back together, if not every day, at least some of the time. I
Yeah.
think we've all learned that, like, I think there's a middle ground.
Mhm.
And, I'm glad that I'm not glad we've had this experience. I wish we never did, but I feel like it's this experience that has allowed the world to see things in a flexible way, especially the big corporations who said they could never do it, it could never be done. That was what drove me to be an entrepreneur. I hated being told, no, you can't work from home today because we don't do things that way. Like it made my skin crawl.
Yeah, I agree.
And,
Yeah.
and now I think, obviously there's an openness to seeing like actually people can sometimes be even more productive when they don't have to deal with all the bullshit.
Well, and I find too, like I'm a very social person, and I mean, half the time I come to the spa and I'm talking to people. That's like my job basically, and I am not productive here because I can't sit in my office alone and get things done. That I need to be diligent, and I'm almost more of like a squirrel when it comes to when I'm working at work because I need to be social with everyone. But it's
Yeah.
also like you said, there's a time and a place, and everyone works so different. Like it goes down to the introvert and extrovert like
Hmm.
social aspect of people too, right? And I look at some of these big corporate companies like you mentioned that said they couldn't do certain things, and I think we're going to look back at COVID. I can't wait till we can actually say that for real. When we look back at COVID and actually we look at the pandemic and the way things have changed, but we're going to I don't think we're all going to take things for granted like we did. Like we're going to really, when someone asks us to go out for drinks or we're going to ask to be part of something, I think people are going to really think about if it serves their purpose, and then as
Oh,
well as like make that decision for them instead of just feeling like they need to do it. Or I mean, people might want to be doing more because they're thinking more about it.
yeah, I think we're going to be more mindful about our time, and
Yeah.
um, I think it's going to make a big difference.
Yeah. It's, and even bringing back to like, even I look at like for some of my friends who are mothers, right? Of like thinking about their kids, spending so much time with their families and all those different things, sometimes positive, sometimes negative, but
Yeah.
like all those different things that we're going through. But I think it's going to make us stronger at the end of the day. People are looking, like you said, at all the different things they can do for marketing and the online presence. And I think it's just going to make people come back stronger when the world is back to
Yeah,
normal.
I agree. It's like, even before this, like, some of the best ideas come out of having no budget, no resources. Like, that's when you become the most creative and the most resourceful. And now, like, COVID, forced a situation that people never would have
What
done on their own.
Exactly. So what is the best way for people to reach out to you, and or like I guess they could go on like because you have LinkedIn and things like that, but
I have yeah, I'm most responsive on LinkedIn. I do get a lot of messages, but I do eventually respond.
awesome.
I go through them every few days. So that's the easiest place. I'm on Instagram, but not as religiously.
Yeah.
So, but those are LinkedIn is your best bet.
Yeah, awesome. And then the bullet, like Get on there.
Yes, and sign up for the Bullet, thebullet.ca, your daily dose of news.
There you go. There's your elevator pitch.
Yeah. Exactly.
Awesome. Well, this is amazing. Thank you so much for spending time with us.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me.